Story 1. The Misaligned Circuit. I found him standing in the tunnel. Myself, I mean. Same uniform, same lanyard, same scar on my left hand from a splice accident 3 years back. He was holding a voltage meter, reading a circuit that didn't exist on any schematic. When I called out, he turned slowly, his face exactly like mine, except for the eyes. They were empty, hollow, like someone had scraped out everything behind them. He smiled, pressed his meter against the rail, and the reading spiked to match my heartbeat. Then he stepped backward into the wall and vanished, leaving only that persistent hum, the one I've been chasing for weeks now, the one that sounds increasingly like my own name. I've been a senior signal technician for the Metropolitan Transit Authority for 14 years. My job is to maintain the track circuits, the electrical systems that detect train positions and prevent collisions. It's precise work, technical work, the kind that demands you understand the language of voltage and resistance as fluently as English. Every section of track forms a circuit. When a train's wheels bridge the rails, they shunt the current, triggering signals that tell the system a train is present. It's elegant in its simplicity, fail-safe by design. I work the night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. when the trains run less frequently and we can access the tracks without disrupting service. I prefer these hours. The tunnels are quieter, more honest somehow. During the day, the subway is chaos. Thousands of passengers, constant radio chatter, the screech of brakes echoing off tile walls. But at night, the system breathes differently. You can hear the hum of electricity through the rails, the settling of concrete, the distant drip of groundwater seeping through century-old infrastructure. You learn to read these sounds the way a doctor reads a heartbeat. 3 weeks ago, I received a work order for Line 7, the express route running beneath the old financial district. The automated monitoring system reported intermittent occupancy indications on track circuit 7 Delta 9, located between the Commerce Street and Fulton stations. The reading showed a train present even during the maintenance window when no trains were scheduled. Standard procedure suggested a dirty rail contact or a failing relay. I'd seen it 100 times. I entered the tunnel at Commerce Street at 2:47 a.m., accompanied by the usual equipment. A digital multimeter, a track circuit tester, insulated tools, and a radio clipped to my vest. The tunnel stretched ahead, lit by work lights spaced every 50 feet, their sodium glow turning everything the color of old bruises. The air smelled of ozone and damp concrete, cool against my face. Rails gleamed in parallel lines, disappearing into darkness. Track circuit 7 Delta 9 began approximately 800 feet from the platform. I walked the ties carefully, checking my meter against the rails every few steps. The voltage read normal, consistent with an unoccupied circuit. But as I approached the 7 Delta 9 boundary marker, I heard it. A low hum, barely audible beneath the ambient noise of the tunnel. It wasn't the standard 60 Hz hum of AC current. This was different. Deeper. Almost rhythmic. I stopped walking and listened. The sound seemed to pulse, a slow oscillation that rose and fell like breath. I'd never encountered anything quite like it in 14 years. I pressed my meter leads against the rail. The reading flickered, 9.7 volts, 9.8, 9.6, oscillating in time with the hum. A healthy track circuit should show steady voltage. This was anything but steady. I followed the circuit east toward Fulton Station, checking connections at each insulated joint. Everything appeared normal, bonds tight, insulators intact, no visible damage. Yet the hum persisted, growing subtly louder as I moved deeper into the section. My radio crackled with routine dispatches from other crews working different sections. I reported my findings to Central Control, anomalous readings on 7 Delta 9 investigating possible relay fault, and continued walking. At the midpoint of the circuit, I found something unusual. A small junction box mounted on the tunnel wall, partially obscured by decades of grime and cable runs. It wasn't marked on my schematic. That wasn't necessarily alarming. Older sections of the system contained plenty of obsolete equipment, remnants of upgrades and modifications dating back to the 1930s. But this junction box looked different. Newer somehow, despite the dirt. The conduit feeding it disappeared into the tunnel wall at an odd angle, not following standard installation practices. I opened the box. Inside were 3 relays, their coils energized, contacts clicking in sequence with the pulsing hum. But the wiring made no sense. The relays weren't connected to the track circuit, at least not in any configuration I recognized. They appeared to be tapped into something else, some other system running parallel to the rails. I traced the conduit with my flashlight, following it along the wall until it turned sharply and entered a service passage I hadn't noticed before. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to walk through. The kind of maintenance access that appears on old blueprints but gets forgotten over decades of operation. The entrance was partially blocked by cable trays and abandoned equipment. I moved them aside and stepped in. The passage ran perpendicular to the main tunnel, sloping gently downward. The hum was louder here, resonating through the concrete like a physical presence. My flashlight beam caught rough-cut stone walls older than the tiled main tunnel, possibly from the original excavation in the 1920s or even earlier. The air smelled different, stale, unused, with a faint metallic tang that reminded me of blood. I walked approximately 60 feet before the passage opened into a small chamber. It was circular, maybe 12 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that amplified every sound. In the center of the floor sat a metal panel, flush-mounted and covered with decades of dust. The conduit from the junction box terminated at this panel. The hum was loudest here, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I knelt and brushed away the dust. The panel was marked with faded lettering. TCX Experimental Monitoring Station, authorized personnel only, 1952. Below that, a serial number, 7 Delta 9 Sub A. This chamber was an extension of the track circuit I'd been investigating, some kind of secondary monitoring point installed 70 years ago. But it wasn't on any current schematic. It had been forgotten, bricked off behind layers of infrastructure and institutional memory. I pried open the panel with my screwdriver. Inside was a rat's nest of vintage wiring, tube-based relays, and a device I couldn't immediately identify. A black metal cylinder about the size of a coffee can covered in dials and adjustment screws. Wires ran from this cylinder to the track circuit above. It was spliced directly into the rail system, tapping voltage in real time. The cylinder hummed, warm to the touch despite the cool air. I photographed everything with my phone, documenting the setup for my report. As I took the last photo, the cylinder's hum changed pitch, rising sharply for 3 seconds before dropping back to its baseline rhythm. My meter spiked. Voltage on the track circuit above jumped to 15.2 volts, far higher than normal. Then it settled again. Something about that spike felt wrong. Not just technically wrong, but fundamentally wrong, like the system was responding to something other than electrical current. I checked my radio, static. I was too deep in the tunnel, too far from the repeaters. I was alone. I decided to disconnect the cylinder to see if it was causing the anomalous readings. As I reached for the main wire bundle, I heard footsteps behind me in the passage. Slow, measured footsteps echoing off stone. Someone else was in the tunnel. "Hello?" I called out. "MTA Signal Maintenance. Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then they resumed. Closer now. I stood and turned toward the passage entrance, my flashlight beam cutting through darkness. The footsteps continued, deliberate and unhurried, until a figure stepped into the chamber. It was me. I mean that literally. The figure wore my uniform, same gray coveralls, same reflective vest, same MTA identification lanyard hanging around its neck. It carried a voltage meter identical to mine. Its face was my face. Same bone structure, same nose, same scar on the left cheek from a childhood bicycle accident. But the eyes were wrong. Empty, flat, like someone had painted pupils onto glass. We stared at each other for what felt like an hour, but was probably 5 seconds. I couldn't move. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. The figure, my doppelganger, tilted its head slightly, studying me the way you'd study an insect under glass. Then it smiled, a slow mechanical expression that didn't reach those dead eyes. It stepped forward and knelt by the open panel, ignoring me completely. It pressed its voltage meter against the cylinder. The meter's display showed a reading I couldn't quite see from my angle, but the cylinder's hum intensified, pulsing faster. My own heartbeat accelerated, thumping in my chest, and I realized with cold horror that the hum was matching my pulse. Beat for beat. Exactly synchronized. The doppelganger stood and walked toward me. I stepped back against the curved wall, nowhere to go. It stopped inches away, close enough that I could smell myself. Sweat, coffee, the faint odor of electrical insulation that clings to anyone who works underground. It raised one hand and pointed at the panel, then at me, then back at the panel. The gesture was clear. This equipment was connected to me somehow. Then it stepped past me, moving toward the back wall of the chamber. I turned to follow its movement with my flashlight, but the wall was solid concrete. There was no exit. Yet the doppelganger pressed its palm flat against the surface and pushed. The wall rippled like water, and it stepped through, disappearing completely. The concrete solidified behind it, leaving no trace. I stood there, shaking, my mind trying to construct a rational explanation. Hallucination, carbon monoxide poisoning, extreme fatigue. But the cylinder continued humming. My heartbeat continued matching its rhythm. And the voltage meter I'd dropped on the floor displayed a reading that shouldn't exist. Negative resistance. I grabbed my equipment and ran back through the passage, back to the main tunnel, back to where my radio could reach central control. I called in an immediate code for psychological distress, requesting relief and a supervisor escort out of the tunnel. They dispatched someone within 10 minutes. I didn't mention what I'd seen. I reported equipment failure and requested a full engineering review of track circuit 7 Delta 9. The review took place 2 days later. A team of 3 technicians, including my supervisor, entered the service passage. They found the chamber. They found the panel. But the cylinder was gone. The wiring had been cut cleanly, professionally, as though someone had removed it with proper tools. The chamber was empty except for dust and the lingering smell of ozone. My supervisor asked if I'd removed anything. I said no. He didn't believe me but couldn't prove otherwise. The incident went into my file as a documentation error. I'd reported equipment that didn't exist. They reassigned me to Line 3 for the remainder of the month, pending psychological evaluation. But I know what I saw. And I know the cylinder is still down there somewhere, connected to something that lives in the spaces between circuits. Because every night since then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., my heartbeat changes rhythm for 3 seconds. It doubles, then triples, then returns to normal. And during those 3 seconds, I hear the hum, that deep, pulsing hum from track circuit 7 Delta 9, resonating inside my chest, as though the current is running through my own veins now. Last night I checked the automated monitoring logs. Track circuit 7 Delta 9 still reports intermittent occupancy. But now there's a notation in the system added by an unknown user. Occupied, technician present, continuous monitoring in progress. I didn't write that notation, neither did anyone on my crew. When I queried the system for the user ID, it returned my own employee number. But the timestamp showed the entry was made 3 hours before I started my shift. Some circuits don't just measure what's on the track. They measure what's been there, what's coming, what's always been there waiting in the dark. I think the cylinder wasn't monitoring the trains, it was monitoring something else that moves through the tunnels, something that uses our electrical systems the way we use roads. And now it knows I found its junction point. It knows my frequency. Story 2. Interference on Channel B. The voice came through at 3:17 a.m., breaking through the static on Channel B. Unit 427, respond. That was my unit number, but I hadn't keyed my mic. I replied, asking for identification. The voice repeated my exact words back to me, same inflection, same breath patterns, but offset by 3 seconds. As though I was hearing my own transmission from the future. Then it added something I hadn't said yet. Don't check the transmission logs, you're not ready to see your name. My hand was already reaching for the archive database. I pulled up the source metadata. The transmission originated from radio ID 427C, assigned to communications engineer Patricia Holloway. Deceased, October 14, 2019. I looked at my own radio. The label read 427C. I am a communications line engineer for the Metropolitan Underground Transit Authority. My role focuses on maintaining the radio infrastructure that keeps the entire subway system connected. Repeaters, antennas, transmission lines, and the digital backbone that carries voice and data through miles of concrete and steel. Without functional communications, the system collapses. Train operators can't reach dispatch. Maintenance crews become isolated. Emergency response fails. My work ensures that doesn't happen. The communications grid operates on several dedicated frequency bands. Channel A handles train-to-dispatch traffic. Channel C carries maintenance crew coordination. Channel D is reserved for emergency services. Channel B, my primary responsibility, functions as the engineering coordination frequency, used by technical staff to troubleshoot infrastructure problems, coordinate equipment installations, and maintain the network itself. I've worked this position for 7 years. My shifts run from midnight to 8 a.m., the quieter hours when most repairs occur and interference is minimal. I work from the central communications hub, a windowless room filled with rack-mounted equipment, oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, and a bank of radios monitoring every active channel simultaneously. The room hums constantly, cooling fans, hard drives, the soft crackle of radio static. It's become the soundtrack of my life. The interference began 4 weeks ago. Small at first, brief bursts of static on Channel B, lasting only a second or two. Common enough in an underground environment. Electrical interference from train motors, arcing in old cables, even solar activity can disrupt signals. I logged the events and ran routine diagnostics. Everything tested normal. But the interference persisted, appearing at the same time each night, 3:17 a.m. The precision bothered me. Random interference doesn't follow schedules. I began recording the events, capturing the raw audio for analysis. The static contained patterns, rhythmic pulses almost like Morse code, but not quite. Something was transmitting on Channel B and I couldn't identify the source. On the 8th night, the static resolved into a voice, faint, distorted, barely audible beneath the noise. It spoke a single word. 4. I froze, headphones pressed against my ears, adjusting the squelch and volume controls. The voice faded back into static. I replayed the recording 3 times. Definitely a voice. Definitely saying 4. But whose voice? The transmission metadata showed no radio ID, no location data, no authentication signature. A ghost signal. I reported it through proper channels, filed a formal interference complaint with the Spectrum Coordination Office, requested a frequency sweep of Channel B, and scheduled a physical inspection of the nearest repeater sites. The sweep showed no unauthorized transmitters. The repeaters checked out fine. Yet the voice returned the next night, clearer this time. 427. My employee ID number is 427. I sat very still, staring at the radio equipment, my mind racing through explanations, someone playing a prank. A hacker accessing the system, a malfunctioning voice encoder replaying old transmissions. But none of these theories explained how the transmission knew my specific ID number or why it occurred at exactly the same time every night. The following night, the voice spoke a complete sentence. Unit 427 respond. That phrase triggered automatic protocol. When dispatch calls your unit number, you're required to respond immediately. My hand moved toward the microphone before I stopped myself. This wasn't dispatch. Dispatch used Channel A. This was something else, something using my frequency and my identification. I didn't respond. Instead, I triangulated the signal source using 3 different repeater sites. The bearing lines converged on a location beneath the old financial district, near the Commerce Street station, specifically in an area marked on my maps as decommissioned infrastructure, no access. 2 nights later, the voice said something that made my blood run cold. Patricia Holloway, deceased October 14th, 2019. That was my name. But I'm not dead. I'm sitting here, breathing, listening to this transmission, yet the voice stated it as fact, calm and certain, as though reading from an official report. I pulled the employee database and searched for my name. One result, Patricia Holloway, Communications Line Engineer, Employee ID 427, status, active, hired August 2017, everything correct. But when I expanded the record details, I found a notation buried in the file history. Previous holder of ID 427C, Patricia Holloway, deceased October 14, 2019, equipment reassigned. The radio designation I carried, 427C, had belonged to someone else. Someone with my exact name. Someone who had died. I searched deeper into the archives, looking for personnel records, incident reports, anything explaining this impossibility. The system locked me out. Insufficient clearance for historical personnel data. I called the Human Resources Night Desk and requested information about Employee ID 427's history. The clerk, sounding half asleep, told me the ID had been issued to me upon hiring and showed no previous assignments. When I pressed about the notation I'd found, she put me on hold. 10 minutes later, a supervisor came on the line and asked why I was accessing restricted archival data. I explained the radio interference, the voice, the notation. He told me to file a formal inquiry through proper channels and ended the call. The next night, the voice changed. It no longer spoke words. It broadcast audio, a recording of someone working, ambient sounds of equipment humming, fingers typing on a keyboard, the soft squeak of a chair. Office sounds. These specific office sounds from this specific room, the central communications hub where I sat. I recognized the acoustic signature, the particular echo of the cooling fans, the rattle of the loose ceiling panel above Rack 7, the distant rumble of trains passing through the station below. I was hearing a recording of myself working, transmitted back to me through Channel B. I spun around in my chair, searching the room for cameras, hidden recording devices, anything that could explain this. The room was empty, unchanged, filled with the same equipment I'd worked with for years, but something felt wrong. The shadows seemed darker. The hum of electronics sounded hollow, as though coming from far away. That's when I noticed my radio, the portable unit, clipped to my belt. The indicator light was glowing red, signaling active transmission, but I hadn't keyed the mic. My radio was broadcasting without input, transmitting everything it heard back into Channel B. I grabbed the radio and switched it off. The indicator light remained on. I removed the battery. The light stayed red, glowing steadily, impossibly. I threw the radio across the room. It clattered against a rack and went silent. The red light finally died, but the voice on Channel B continued, "Don't remove the radio, Patricia. You'll need it for what comes next." I ripped off my headphones and stepped away from the console. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in, the ceiling lowering. My breath came fast and shallow. I was alone in a locked room underground, surrounded by equipment that was apparently recording and transmitting without authorization, speaking to me in my own voice. I left the hub and went upstairs to the administrative offices, intending to report everything to the night supervisor. But when I reached the supervisor's desk, I found a memo already waiting, addressed to me. It was dated 3 days in the future, November 25th. The header read, "Incident Report. Communications Failure, Channel B, Patricia Holloway investigating." I was holding a document describing events that hadn't happened yet. I didn't sleep for the next 36 hours. I avoided Channel B entirely, worked on other frequencies, busied myself with equipment that had nothing to do with the interference. But at 3:17 a.m. on November 25th, the date from the memo, my pager went off. Emergency on Channel B, all communications down. I was being summoned back to investigate the very incident the future memo had described. When I returned to the hub, every screen displayed the same message. Signal source, repeater station 7 Delta Sub, decommissioned sector. That was the location my triangulation had identified weeks ago. The system wanted me to go there. I gathered equipment, portable spectrum analyzer, signal tracer, flashlights, and descended into the tunnels alone against protocol because I needed to know. I needed to understand what was calling me through the static. The decommissioned sector was a service tunnel branching off from the Commerce Street station, sealed by a steel door marked "Authorized Access Only, Structural Hazard." The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and entered. The tunnel beyond was older, rougher, carved from living rock. Cables hung from ceiling mounts, many severed and dangling. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. My signal tracer chirped steadily, following the interference toward its source. I found the repeater station in a side chamber, an ancient rack-mounted unit from the 1980s, covered in dust but still powered, its indicator lights blinking in sequence. Connected to it was a portable radio transmitting continuously. I lifted the radio and checked the label, 427C. My radio, the one I'd thrown across the hub. It was here, impossibly broadcasting a loop of my own recorded voice back into Channel B, creating a temporal echo that folded past and future together. And beneath the radio sat a personnel file folder, its cover stamped with my employee ID. I opened it. Inside were incident reports describing my death. October 14th, 2019, electrocution during unauthorized investigation of repeater station 7 Delta Sub. Body recovered 3 days later. Photos showed a corpse in a communications engineer uniform, face obscured by decomposition and tunnel moisture, but the ID lanyard clearly visible. Patricia Holloway, 427C. I looked down at my own lanyard. Same name, same number, same face in the laminated photo. The radio in my hand crackled. "You're not the first, Patricia, and you won't be the last. The system needs a Channel B engineer. When one fails, it calls another." You've been responding for 3 weeks now, transmitting yourself backward, preparing the loop. Welcome home. I'm writing this from the hub, my shift nearly over. Morning light bleeding through the edges of the sealed door. I haven't touched Channel B since returning. But every night at 3:17 a.m. I hear my voice calling back through the static, speaking words I haven't said yet, describing investigations I haven't conducted, warning about equipment I haven't touched. The transmissions are getting longer, more detailed. They're teaching me the infrastructure of my own death. Some frequencies don't carry messages, they carry warnings. Story 3. The switch that wouldn't reset. I was standing trackside, watching switch 14A throw itself, left to diverging route, pause, then right back to main, in a rhythm that felt almost playful. I'd removed the power supply 3 hours ago, pulled every breaker, disconnected the motor entirely. The switch continued moving, steel grinding against steel as though something underground was operating it manually. I knelt and placed my hand on the rail. It vibrated with that familiar pulse, the same pulse I'd felt in my chest since this assignment began. Then the control panel in my truck started beeping. A message scrolled across the diagnostic screen. Manual override accepted. Operator, your name. Time, 3:47 a.m. I looked at my watch, 3:46 a.m. The system was logging an action I would apparently perform in 60 seconds. My hand moved toward the control lever without conscious thought. Something else was driving now. I've been a track switch maintenance crew chief for 12 years, responsible for the mechanical systems that guide trains from one route to another. Switches are the decision points of the rail network, the places where steel literally splits in 2 directions and trains must commit to a path. When a switch fails, trains can't move. Everything stops. My job is to ensure they never fail. A track switch consists of several components. The points, movable rails that guide the wheels. The stock rails, fixed rails the points press against. The switch machine, the motor that moves the points. And the detection system, sensors that confirm the switch position. It's a simple mechanical system refined over 150 years of rail operations. When maintained properly, switches are reliable, predictable, and utterly mundane. Switch 14A, located on the express bypass between Chambers Street and Brooklyn Bridge, had been giving us trouble for 3 weeks. The automated monitoring system reported intermittent failures to detect proper alignment. The switch would throw to the diverging route, but the sensors wouldn't confirm the points had fully closed against the stock rails. Trains were being held until manual verification occurred, causing delays across the entire Southern Division. I received the repair work order on a Tuesday. Standard procedure: inspect the switch machine, check the detection circuits, verify rail alignment, adjust as needed. I scheduled a track outage for the following Sunday night when train traffic was lightest. My crew arrived at 11 p.m. Myself, 2 mechanics, and an electrical specialist. We established a work zone, posted protection, and began the inspection. The switch machine looked fine. No visible damage, motor housing intact, mechanical linkages properly lubricated. I operated the control lever manually. The points moved smoothly, throwing from main route to diverging and back again. Steel sliding precisely against steel. The motion felt normal, but the detection circuit disagreed. With the switch clearly aligned to the main route, locked in place, the sensor reported indeterminate position. I checked the sensor mounting brackets. Tight, no movement. The detection bar that physically contacts the points was properly positioned. Yet the circuit insisted the switch position was unknown. My electrical specialist ran diagnostics on the sensor wiring. Continuity good, voltage normal. No shorts, no grounds, no interference. The sensor itself tested functional. We replaced it anyway. Installed a brand new unit, calibrated to factory specifications. The problem persisted. Indeterminate position. Over the next 4 hours, we replaced every electrical component in the detection system. New wiring, new relays, new interface modules. We even replaced the control lever in the distant signal house. Nothing changed. The switch operated perfectly, but the system couldn't or wouldn't confirm its position. At 4 a.m., frustrated and exhausted, I called Central Control and recommended we tag the switch out of service pending further investigation. The dispatcher agreed. We secured the switch in the main root position with mechanical clamps and locks, ensuring it couldn't move accidentally, and cleared the work zone. As I packed my tools, I heard a sound behind me, a low grinding of metal on metal. I turned. Switch 14A was moving. The points were sliding toward the diverging position despite being mechanically locked. The clamps I'd installed 10 minutes ago were bending, steel deforming under impossible force. The switch continued throwing until fully aligned to the diverging route, then stopped. My crew stood frozen, staring. One of the mechanics said, "That shouldn't be possible. The machine isn't powered." He was right. We disconnected the power supply. There was no electricity flowing to the switch machine. Yet the points had moved, driven by some force that had nothing to do with the motor. I approached the switch cautiously, flashlight in hand. The mechanical clamps were bent 90 degrees, ruined. The lock had sheared clean through. The hardened steel hasps snapped like plastic. I knelt and examined the switch machine housing. It was cold, inactive, not even warm from residual motor heat. But inside I could hear something moving, a soft mechanical clicking, rhythmic and purposeful like a clock mechanism. I opened the housing. Inside, the gears were turning slowly, meshing and unmeshing, driven by nothing visible. The motor shaft rotated smoothly, its coupling disconnected and dangling uselessly to the side. The gears were moving themselves as though the switch had learned to operate independently of its power source. I shut the housing and stood up, my mind refusing to process what I'd seen. My electrical specialist suggested we cut the mechanical linkages entirely, physically separating the points from the machine. I agreed. We brought out a plasma cutter and severed the connection rods, leaving the switch points isolated and unable to move. The points moved anyway. Slowly grinding against the stock rails without mechanical assistance, they slid back to the main root position, then reversed, then aligned to diverging again. A slow, deliberate oscillation back and forth as though the rails themselves were flexing. We left the site. I didn't document what we'd seen in the official report. Instead, I wrote, "Detection circuit failure, root cause undetermined, recommend engineering analysis." I went home, slept poorly, and returned the next night with different equipment, voltage meters, magnetic field detectors, vibration sensors, and a high-speed camera. Switch 14. A was still moving when I arrived, oscillating slowly between routes. I set up the camera and recorded 5 minutes of footage. The points moved smoothly, no jerking or binding, exactly as if a motor were driving them. But the motor remained disconnected, cold and lifeless. I placed a magnetic field detector near the rails. Normal readings. No unusual electromagnetic activity. I checked for ground vibrations that might indicate nearby machinery. Nothing. The switch was moving in complete isolation from any external force. Then I noticed the pattern. The points weren't oscillating randomly. They were moving in a specific rhythm. 6 seconds to the diverging route. Hold for 2 seconds, 6 seconds back to main. Hold for 2 seconds, repeat. Precise, mechanical, intentional. I timed the cycle against my watch. After 30 minutes, the rhythm hadn't varied by more than 1/10 of a second. Whatever was moving switch 14A was doing so with inhuman precision. I returned to my truck and pulled up the historical work orders for this switch. The maintenance records went back 40 years, digitized from paper archives. Normal entries mostly, routine inspections, occasional adjustments, standard component replacements. But one entry caught my attention. October 1987. Switch machine replaced due to operator injury. Employee Dennis Kowalski sustained crush injury during manual operation. Equipment removed and destroyed per safety protocol. I searched for incident reports from October 1987. The file was marked archived, restricted access. I didn't have clearance, but I knew someone in the safety office who owed me a favor. I called him at home, woke him up and asked him to retrieve the file. He called back 20 minutes later. "You sure you want this? It's pretty ugly." I said yes. He read the report aloud. Dennis Kowalski, track switch mechanic, had been performing routine maintenance on switch 14A when the machine activated unexpectedly. The points moved while his hand was inside the mechanism, crushing 3 fingers before he could pull away. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was that the switch wasn't powered at the time of the accident. Multiple witnesses confirmed the circuit breakers were open, yet the machine activated anyway, as though operated manually by someone who wasn't there. Kowalski spent 3 weeks in the hospital. When he returned to work, he refused to go near switch 14A. He filed a formal complaint alleging the switch was possessed or haunted, and requested permanent reassignment. The complaint was dismissed as trauma-induced delusion. Kowalski transferred to a different division and retired 5 years later. The switch machine was replaced as a precautionary measure despite testing normal. The new machine, installed in November 1987, was the same unit currently installed. The same unit that had just demonstrated autonomous operation 36 years later. I went back to the switch site and checked the machine housing serial number. It matched the 1987 installation record. This machine had been in place for over 3 decades, operating normally until 3 weeks ago when the detection failures began. What changed 3 weeks ago? I pulled the automated activity logs. On October 23rd at 2:14 a.m., switch 14A received an unusual command from the central control system. Manual override, operator ID 427K. That was Dennis Kowalski's employee ID. But Dennis Kowalski had retired in 1992. He'd been dead since 2003. I stared at the log entry, my hands shaking. The system had received a manual override command from a dead man, and since that moment, switch 14A had been trying to move on its own, oscillating endlessly between routes as though searching for something or someone. I called my contact in the safety office again. "I need you to find out how Dennis Kowalski died." He pulled the records. "Heart attack. December 2003, died at home. Why?" "Did the autopsy mention anything unusual?" "Let me check." Papers rustled on the other end of the line. "Yeah, actually. The medical examiner noted extensive scarring on right hand consistent with severe crush injury. Healed. That matches the 1987 incident. But there's a weird note at the bottom. Subject's hand exhibited involuntary muscle contractions post-mortem, ceasing approximately 6 hours after death. They attributed it to residual nerve activity, but the duration was unusually long. 6 hours of involuntary movement, as though even in death Dennis Kowalski's hand was trying to operate a switch. I returned to switch 14A and placed my own hand on the control lever, the same lever Kowalski would have touched thousands of times during his career. The metal vibrated softly, pulsing in rhythm with the point's movement. And in that vibration I felt something else. A pattern, a message, a desperate attempt at communication through the only language the switch understood, motion, position, and the endless oscillation between choices. I've been standing here for 40 minutes now, my hand on the lever, feeling the pulse, and I understand what switch 14A is trying to say. It's not malfunctioning. It's asking a question, the same question it asked in 1987, the same question it's asked every night since Dennis Kowalski's override command reactivated something that never quite left. Which way? Which route? Where am I supposed to go? The diagnostic screen in my truck is scrolling continuously now, logging manual overrides I haven't performed, commands I haven't issued, all attributed to my employee ID, all time-stamped seconds into the future. The system thinks I'm operating the switch, but I'm not. Something is operating through me, learning my patterns, recording my responses, preparing to repeat this cycle with the next crew chief assigned to maintain switch 14A. Some switches don't just choose between routes, they choose between operators. Story 4. Tunnel frequency 0.0 Hz. The oscilloscope trace went flat at exactly 3:17 a.m., a perfect horizontal line representing 0.0 Hz, a frequency that shouldn't exist outside theoretical physics. Sound requires vibration. 0 Hz means nothing is moving, nothing is oscillating, perfect stillness. But the audio monitor was picking up something. A sound like breathing, slow and rhythmic, emanating from coordinates that placed the source directly beneath my workstation. I switched on the recording system and listened. The breathing synchronized with my own, matching my respiratory rate exactly. Then it stopped. 3 seconds of absolute silence. When it resumed, the breathing was faster, heavier, as though something had started running. But I was sitting perfectly still. I am a signal systems analyst for the Metropolitan Underground Transit Authority, assigned to the Frequency Monitoring and Electromagnetic Compatibility Division. My work involves analyzing the electromagnetic environment of the subway system, measuring radio frequency emissions, tracking interference sources, and ensuring that the thousands of electronic systems operating underground don't disrupt each other. It's invisible work, dealing with phenomena most people never think about, the spectrum of energy that fills the air around us constantly. The monitoring station occupies a small windowless room in the basement of the Franklin Street Administrative Building. Rack-mounted spectrum analyzers line 3 walls, their displays showing real-time waterfall plots of radio frequency activity from DC to 6 gigahertz. Antennas throughout the subway system feed data back to my workstation, creating a comprehensive map of electromagnetic activity across 248 miles of track. I work alone, typically from midnight to 8 a.m., when the electromagnetic environment is quietest, and anomalies are easier to detect. My primary responsibility is logging and investigating any unexpected signals, illegal radio transmitters, malfunctioning equipment, external interference from commercial broadcasts. It's meticulous technical work that requires patience and attention to detail. The anomaly appeared 4 weeks ago during a routine overnight monitoring session. At 3:17 a.m., one of my low-frequency analyzers, dedicated to monitoring frequencies below 100 Hz, registered a signal at exactly 0.0 Hz. I initially assumed it was a calibration error. 0 Hz represents a DC offset, a constant voltage with no oscillation, which can occur if the analyzer's input is improperly grounded. I ran diagnostic tests. The equipment checked out fine. The next night, the signal appeared again. Same time, same frequency. 0.0 Hz lasting for exactly 3 minutes before disappearing. This time, I logged the event and captured the raw data for analysis. The waveform was bizarre, a perfectly flat line, no variation, no noise, no modulation, complete electrical stillness. But embedded in that stillness was an audio signature, something the spectrum analyzer's digital processing had extracted from the apparently silent signal. I loaded the audio file and listened through headphones. At first, nothing, just the soft hiss of the recording system's noise floor. Then gradually, I heard it, A low rumble, almost subsonic, more felt than heard. It resonated in my chest, making my sternum vibrate. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, directionless and invasive. I checked the source coordinates. The triangulation system uses timestamps from multiple antenna sites to calculate the physical location of any signal. For this 0.0 Hz emission, the coordinates pointed to a location beneath the Franklin Street station, approximately 200 feet below street level. That placed the source in the tunnel infrastructure, possibly in a service level or utility passage. Over the following week, I refined my monitoring setup, adding more sensitive equipment and expanding the frequency range down to 0.01 Hz. The signal appeared every night at 3:17 a.m. without fail. Each time I captured better data, and each time the audio component became more defined. By the seventh night, I could clearly distinguish a pattern in the rumble, a rhythmic oscillation, rising and falling like breath. Something was breathing at 0.0 Hz. That didn't make physical sense. Breathing requires air movement, which creates acoustic pressure waves which have frequency. 0 Hz implies no movement, no oscillation, no change over time. Yet my equipment was detecting exactly that. An oscillating signal with no oscillation, a contradiction that violated basic physics. I consulted with a colleague in the acoustic engineering department, describing the signal without mentioning its impossible frequency. He suggested I might be detecting infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing, typically generated by large-scale environmental phenomena like distant earthquakes or ocean waves. But infrasound has a measurable frequency, usually between 1 and 20 Hz. My signal measured 0.0 Hz exactly. 2 weeks into the investigation, the signal changed. At 3:17 a.m., the analyzer registered not just 0.0 Hz, but a harmonic series, 0.0 Hz, 0.0 Hz, 0.0 Hz, repeating across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. Mathematically impossible. Harmonics are integer multiples of a fundamental frequency. Multiples of 0 are 0. Yet my equipment showed distinct harmonic peaks, each at 0.0 Hz, each with slightly different amplitudes, as though the signal existed in multiple dimensions of the spectrum simultaneously. The audio on that night was clearer. Breathing. Definitely breathing, but now accompanied by other sounds. A soft, wet sound like something moving through liquid, and beneath that a low grinding like stone rubbing against stone. The sounds layered together into something that shouldn't exist, organic and mechanical, alive and utterly still. I triangulated the source again. The coordinates had shifted. The signal now appeared to originate from directly beneath my monitoring station, in a space the building's architectural plans labeled as Foundation Substructure No Access. I checked the building's history. Franklin Street Administrative Building was constructed in 1923, built atop the existing subway tunnel infrastructure. The foundation descended 180 feet, anchored into bedrock. The no-access space was the gap between the building's lowest basement and the tunnel ceiling. About 20 feet of empty air and structural supports, sealed during construction and never entered since. I requested access through the facilities management office. My request was denied. The space was classified as structurally sensitive. Opening access points could compromise building stability. I pressed the issue, citing the need to investigate potential electromagnetic interference affecting subway operations. The facilities director escalated my request to the Engineering Safety Board, where it died in committee review. So I went down there myself. The Franklin Street building has 5 basement levels. The lowest level, B5, houses mechanical systems, water pumps, electrical distribution, ventilation equipment. A locked door at the east end of B5 leads to a maintenance ladder descending into the foundation substructure. I bypassed the lock with a maintenance keycard borrowed from a friendly janitor and descended. The ladder dropped through a narrow shaft cut through concrete, lit by a single caged bulb every 20 feet. I climbed down approximately 60 feet before reaching a small platform bolted to the structural supports. Below me, the shaft continued into darkness. Above, barely visible, was the underside of the B5 floor. Around me stretched the foundation substructure, a forest of steel I-beams and concrete columns rising from the tunnel ceiling far below. I stood on the platform and checked my portable spectrum analyzer. The 0.0 Hz signal was present, strong, its source location now resolving to within 10 feet of my position. But there was nothing here, just structural members and stale air. Then I noticed the sound, not through my equipment, through my ears. A low rumble resonating through the steel and concrete, vibrating in my bones. The same sound I'd been recording for 2 weeks. It was here, physically present, not just an electromagnetic phenomenon. I followed the sound, climbing across support beams, moving deeper into the substructure. The rumble grew louder, more distinct. I could feel it in my teeth now, a subaudible pressure that made my inner ear ache. My flashlight beam cut through darkness, illuminating steel and concrete and shadows that seemed to shift and recoil from the light. I found the source in a corner where 4 massive columns converged, creating a small void space about 8 feet wide. Something was embedded in the concrete at the center of this void. A smooth metallic cylinder 3 feet long and maybe 6 inches in diameter, partially exposed where the concrete had cracked and fallen away. Wires ran from the cylinder into conduits, disappearing into the building's structure above. I approached carefully and examined the cylinder. No markings, no manufacturer labels. Just smooth metal, cool to the touch, humming faintly. The wires were modern, insulated, color-coded, consistent with 2020's installation standards, but the cylinder itself looked older, its surface patinated and worn. I traced the wires upward. They ran directly to the B4 level, entering the building's electrical distribution system. Someone had spliced this device into the building's power grid, tapping electricity to run whatever the cylinder did. I pulled out my spectrum analyzer and measured the electromagnetic field around the cylinder. The 0.0 Hz signal was emanating from it, pulsing in steady rhythm. And now, this close, I could hear the audio component without electronic assistance, a deep subsonic tone that made my vision blur and my balance waver. I needed to know what this device did. I photographed it from every angle, documented the wiring, and prepared to take a small sample of the metal for analysis. As I positioned my cutting tool, the device's hum changed pitch. The 0.0 Hz signal spiked on my analyzer, jumping to 10 Hz, then 20 Hz, then 50 Hz. A rapid escalation from impossible stillness to audible vibration. And I heard breathing, not recorded breathing. Not electromagnetic breathing. Actual breathing in the air behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just shadows and steel. But the breathing continued, close and ragged, as though something large and exhausted stood just beyond my flashlight's reach. I swept the beam across the void space, empty. But the breathing followed my movements, staying always in the periphery, always just out of sight. My spectrum analyzer went insane, the display filled with signals, 0.0 Hz, 5 Hz, 10 Hz, 50 Hz, 100 Hz, 500 Hz, all appearing simultaneously, all originating from the same impossible point in space. The audio spectrum showed everything and nothing. White noise and perfect silence layered together, contradictory but real. I ran. Scrambled back across the support beams, climbed the ladder, emerged into B5, and sealed the access door behind me. I stood in the mechanical room gasping, my hands shaking, the subsonic hum still resonating in my chest even though I was 60 feet away from the source. The next morning, I filed a formal report describing the device and recommending immediate investigation by engineering safety teams. The report was classified and removed from the standard documentation system. I received a call from an undisclosed administrator informing me that the anomalous equipment had been documented previously and was under ongoing study by specialized personnel. My access to the B5 maintenance areas was revoked, but the 0.0 Hz signal continues every night at 3:17 a.m. And now, when I listen to the recordings, I hear my own breathing mixed in with the subsonic tones. My respiratory rate, my rhythm, recorded and played back with a 3-second delay as though the device has learned to mimic me. Last night, the signal stopped at 3:17 a.m. For 3 full minutes, my analyzers registered nothing. Complete electromagnetic silence. Then at 3:20 a.m., a new signal appeared. My voice recorded from somewhere saying words I don't remember speaking. It's not breathing. It's listening. Some frequencies don't transmit information, they harvest it. Story 5. The red aspect that stayed on. Signal F-22 was red, solid, unwavering red. Despite every system check confirming the track was clear, power was cut, and no train had passed in 40 minutes. I stood in the control room, staring at that single red light on a board of greens and yellows, my hand hovering over the manual reset. I pressed it. Nothing. The red light remained, impossibly bright, almost pulsing. Then the radio crackled. "Control, this is Track Inspection Unit 7. We're at Signal F-22. There's a train here." I looked at my board. No train. No occupancy indication, just that red light. "Describe the train," I said, my voice steady despite the ice spreading through my chest. The radio hissed with static, then, "It's an old work train, single car, no markings, and control. The headlights are flashing in Morse code. They're spelling your name. I am a line control signal supervisor for the Metropolitan Underground Transit Authority, responsible for managing train movements through the Central Business District corridor. My workstation is the nerve center of the operation, a U-shaped desk facing a massive illuminated board displaying every signal in my territory. 147 signals covering 23 miles of track. Each signal appears as a colored indicator light, green for proceed, yellow for approach, red for stop. My job is to monitor these lights, respond to anomalies, and coordinate with train operators and track crews to keep trains moving safely. I've worked this position for 16 years, always the overnight shift, always alone in the control room. I prefer it that way. During the day, the room fills with supervisors and managers, people looking over shoulders and asking questions. At night, it's just me and the board, the quiet hum of ventilation and the soft clicking of relays as signals change in response to train movements. It's meditative work in a way, watching the patterns of lights shift and flow as trains progress through their routes, ensuring that each movement follows the rules encoded into the signal system over a century of refinement. Signal F-22 is located on the express track between Borough Hall and Atlantic Avenue, positioned at the entrance to a curve where the tunnel descends to pass beneath an intersecting line. It's a critical signal. Trains approaching at speed must see it from a distance and have time to brake if it displays red. F-22 is integrated into the automatic block system, meaning it displays red whenever a train occupies the block of track ahead, preventing rear-end collisions through simple fail-safe logic. If the block is occupied, the signal is red. If the block is clear, the signal is green or yellow if the next block is occupied. This system has operated reliably since the 1930s. 4 weeks ago, F-22 began displaying red without cause. The first incident occurred at 2:47 a.m. on October 18th. I noticed the light change from green to red on my board, indicating a train had entered the block. But my occupancy indicators, separate circuits that directly detect train presence, showed the block as unoccupied. I checked my train movement logs. No trains were scheduled in that section. I keyed my radio and contacted the nearest train operator, asking for visual confirmation. He reported passing signal F-22 approximately 5 minutes prior and confirmed the track behind him was clear. Standard procedure requires investigating signal malfunctions immediately. I dispatched a track inspection team to physically verify conditions at F-22. They arrived within 20 minutes and reported finding nothing unusual. Track clear, signal functioning normally, displaying green aspect. Yet on my control board, the light remained red. I initiated a remote reset, sending an electrical command to reset the signal's logic circuits. The red light on my board flickered, went dark for 1 second, then re-illuminated red. The reset had failed. I tried again. Same result. Whatever was keeping F-22 red wasn't responding to normal reset protocols. I called the signal maintainer on duty and requested he physically inspect the signal equipment. He arrived at the site 90 minutes later and opened the relay case, a weatherproof enclosure containing the mechanical relays that control the signal's aspects. He found all relays in their proper states, contacts clean and properly aligned, voltages normal. He manually forced the signal to green by bypassing the track circuit. On my control board, F-22 turned green. He restored normal operation. F-22 turned red again instantly. We spent 3 hours troubleshooting that night, replacing relays, checking wiring, testing every component in the signal system. Everything functioned normally in isolation, but once reconnected to the track circuit, F-22 locked red. Finally, at 6:30 a.m., as the morning rush approached, I authorized leaving F-22 displaying red and routing trains through an alternate track. The signal maintainer tagged it out of service pending further investigation. F-22 remained out of service for 2 days while engineering staff analyzed the system. They found nothing wrong. On the 3rd day, they placed it back in service. It operated normally for 6 hours, then locked red again at 2:47 a.m., exactly the same time as the original failure. This pattern repeated for 2 weeks. F-22 would function normally during the day, then lock red at 2:47 a.m. every night. I documented every incident, logged every troubleshooting step, filed formal anomaly reports. The engineering department couldn't explain it. The signal system's logic was simple and deterministic. There was no mechanism by which F-22 could display red unless the track circuit detected a train. Yet no train was present. On the 15th night, I decided to observe F-22 in person. I left the control room, a violation of protocol, but I needed to see the signal directly. I took a subway service vehicle down to the Atlantic Avenue station and walked the track to F-22's location. The signal mast stood at the tunnel wall, its red lamp glowing brightly, illuminating the curved track ahead. I stood beneath it and looked down the tunnel. Empty. No trains, no workers, just darkness and the distant glow of the next signal, F-23 displaying green. I checked my portable radio, confirming my control board showed F-22 as red. I looked at the signal. Red. I placed my hand on the signal mast. It vibrated softly, a low-frequency hum resonating through the steel. And beneath that hum, I heard something else. A rhythmic clicking like relay contacts opening and closing, but slower than normal electrical operation. The clicking had a pattern: 3 fast clicks, pause, 3 fast clicks, pause, 3 slow clicks, Morse code, SOS. I stepped back, my mind racing. Signals don't transmit Morse code. They display fixed aspects controlled by simple on-off relay logic. Yet F-22 was clicking out a distress signal, repeating endlessly, the vibration traveling through the mast and into the tunnel structure. I returned to the control room and reviewed the historical records for signal F-22. The installation dated to 1936, part of a major signal system upgrade. I accessed the archived maintenance logs, paper documents scanned into the digital system. Most entries were routine: lamp replacements, relay adjustments, track circuit maintenance. But one entry from November 1952 caught my attention. Signal F-22 removed from service due to relay malfunction following incident involving Work Train 7. Equipment replaced. Service restored November 18, 1952. I searched for incident reports from November 1952. Found it. Work Train 7, a single-car maintenance vehicle, derailed near signal F-22 on November 12, 1952 at 2:47 a.m. The derailment caused the train to strike the signal mast, damaging the relay case and track circuits. The train operator, James Holloway, was killed. The train was too damaged to remove immediately and remained at the scene for 6 days before being cut apart and hauled out in sections. James Holloway. I stared at the name. No relation to me as far as I knew, though the surname made me uneasy. I continued reading. The accident investigation concluded that excessive speed on the curve caused the derailment. Holloway had been operating alone, in violation of safety rules requiring two-person crews on work trains. He'd apparently been trying to complete an emergency track repair before the morning rush, rushing through his work, pushing the train too fast. The derailment killed him instantly, crushing him in the overturned car. The signal replaced after the incident was the same signal currently malfunctioning. The equipment removed from F-22 in 1952 had been damaged by the derailment, physically struck by the train, relays jarred loose, wiring torn. Yet before removal, maintenance logs noted the signal continued displaying red aspect despite loss of power, as though mechanically locked. They'd attributed it to physical damage and replaced the entire assembly. And now, 70 years later, the replacement signal was displaying the same symptom. Locked red, unresponsive to resets, operating without apparent power source. I went back to F-22 the next night, this time with recording equipment. I set up a video camera aimed at the signal and a sensitive microphone to capture any sounds. Then I waited. At 2:47 a.m., the signal, currently displaying green on my portable monitor, changed to red. On camera, I watched it happen. The green lamp extinguished, the red lamp illuminated, and simultaneously a shadow crossed in front of the camera lens. Not a person, not anything solid, just a darkening of the image, as though something non-physical had passed between the camera and the signal. I reviewed the footage. The shadow moved from left to right following the track alignment, moving toward the curve where the 1952 derailment occurred. And in the audio, beneath the ambient tunnel noise, I heard it again. The clicking. SOS, repeating. Desperate. I reported my findings to the operations manager, including the historical connection to the 1952 accident. He listened patiently, then informed me that the engineering department had decided to replace signal F-22 entirely. New mast, new relays, new lamps, new track circuits. A complete removal and reinstallation. The work was scheduled for the following weekend. The replacement crew worked all Saturday night. They disconnected F-22, removed the mast, excavated the foundation, pulled all wiring, and installed a brand new signal assembly 50 feet north of the original location. By Sunday morning, the old F-22 was gone, replaced by modern LED signal heads and solid-state control equipment. No mechanical relays, No physical contacts to click. All electronic, all digital, all new. Sunday night, I watched my control board as the new signal was placed in service. F-22 displayed green. Trains passed without incident. I felt cautiously optimistic. Maybe replacing the equipment had solved the problem. Maybe the issue had been some lingering electromagnetic anomaly in the old relays, something we'd failed to detect but had been eliminated by the new installation. At 2:47 a.m. Monday morning, the new F-22 turned red. I stared at my board in disbelief. No train, no occupancy, just red. I called the signal maintainer. He accessed the new signal's digital diagnostic interface and found no faults. The signal reported receiving a stop command from the central logic controller, but no such command appeared in the controller's logs. The signal was responding to an instruction that didn't exist. He reset the signal remotely. It turned green. 30 seconds later, it turned red again. We repeated this cycle for an hour. Every reset succeeded temporarily, but F-22 inevitably returned to red, as though drawn back to that state by some force stronger than our control systems. I went down to the track again. The new signal mast stood in its new location, LED lamps glowing red. I walked back to where the old mast had been. The foundation hole had been filled and paved over, leaving no trace of the original installation. But when I stood on that spot and listened, I heard the clicking, faint now, distant but still present, coming from beneath the concrete. SOS, 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 and then I saw it, movement in the tunnel ahead near the curve. Not a shadow this time, an actual train, an old work train, single car, its paint faded and streaked with rust. It sat motionless on the track, its headlights shining directly at me. The headlights began flashing. On off, on off. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes, SOS. I raised my radio and reported what I was seeing. The control room dispatcher said there were no trains in that section. The nearest train was 3 stations away. I insisted. I could see it. An old work train sitting on the track, exactly where Work Train 7 had derailed in 1952. The dispatcher sent a track inspection crew. They arrived within 15 minutes. I stood with them, pointing at the train. They saw nothing, scanned the tunnel with flashlights, empty tracks stretching into darkness. They asked if I was feeling all right. I said yes, but I was staring at the train, watching its headlights continue flashing my name now. Not SOS, but my actual name, letter by letter in Morse code. As though James Holloway had learned who I was and was calling to me across 70 years of darkness. I was relieved of duty and placed on administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. That was 3 days ago. I've been home since, trying to sleep, trying to process what I witnessed. But every night at 2:47 a.m. I wake to the sound of clicking. It's coming from my apartment walls, traveling through the building structure, as though the tunnel infrastructure extends into my home. And when I listen closely, the clicking spells out a message repeated endlessly. The signal is mine now. I'm waiting for your train. Some signals don't control traffic. They mark thresholds. Story 6. Log entry number Hexa 0. The log entry appeared at the top of my queue with no timestamp, no location code, no fault description. Just the entry number, number 000000. In database terms, that's null, an error, an impossibility. I opened it anyway. The screen went black for 3 seconds, then displayed a single line of text. Now playing, terminal viewed at MP4. A video player launched automatically. The footage showed my workstation from an angle that shouldn't exist, positioned behind my chair about 7 feet up, looking down at the back of my head as I typed. I was alone in the room. I turned slowly in my chair to look at the corner where the camera angle originated. Empty. Just ceiling tiles and a ventilation grate. On screen, my past self turned to look at the same corner, and something in the shadows moved closer. I am a digital record keeper and software technician for the Metropolitan Underground Transit Authority, assigned to the automated fault logging and management system. My role involves maintaining the databases that track every malfunction, alert, error code, and system anomaly across the entire subway network. When a signal fails, when a switch malfunctions, when a power surge disrupts operations, all of it generates automated log entries that flow into my system. I catalog these entries, assign them to appropriate repair crews, track resolution status, and archive the data for long-term analysis. The work is entirely digital. I rarely enter the tunnels themselves. My domain is the clean, climate-controlled environment of the Data Management Center, a room filled with server racks, multiple monitors, and the soft whir of cooling fans. I work the night shift, midnight to 8 a.m., when system traffic is lighter, and I can perform database maintenance without disrupting active operations. The AFLM system has been operational since 2012, replacing decades of paper-based maintenance logging. It's reliable, well-documented, and thoroughly debugged. Every log entry receives a unique sequential identifier starting from number 000001, assigned automatically when the entry is created. The system has generated over 16 million entries in 12 years of operation. I've personally reviewed thousands of them. Log entry number 000000 appeared in my queue 4 weeks ago on October 23rd at 3:17 a.m. I noticed it immediately. The entry number was wrong. Database systems don't assign 0 as an identifier. 0 is reserved, used internally to represent null values, empty fields, absence of data. A log entry numbered number 000000 shouldn't exist within the system's logic. I opened the entry expecting to find corruption or a database glitch. Instead, I found a properly formatted log entry with most fields blank. Timestamp, null. Location, null. Fault code, null. Description, null. Only 2 fields contain data. Entry ID, number 000000, status, open. An open fault with no information. I flagged it for deletion and moved on to other work. The next night, entry number 000000 reappeared in my queue. I checked the deletion log. The entry had been removed successfully 23 hours prior. Yet here it was again, recreated somehow, still blank, still marked as open. I ran a database integrity check. No errors found. I searched the application logs for any indication of what was creating this entry. Nothing. No creation timestamp. No user ID, no source system. Entry number 000000 existed without origin. I escalated the issue to the senior database administrator. He accessed the system remotely, examined entry number 000000, and concluded it was a minor indexing bug. Some quirk in how the database handled null values. He patched the system and assured me the entry wouldn't reappear. I logged off at 8 a.m. and went home. Entry number 000000 was waiting for me when I logged on the next night. Still blank, still open, still impossibly present. This time I didn't try to delete it. Instead, I analyzed its database structure at the technical level, examining the raw data stored in the system's backend. What I found disturbed me. Entry number 000000 wasn't stored in the normal fault log tables. It existed in a separate, undocumented table labeled Archive Shadow, a structure I'd never encountered in 12 years of managing this system. The table contained one entry, number 000000. I searched the system documentation for any reference to Archive Shadow. Nothing. I contacted the original software vendor. They'd never heard of such a table and suggested it might be a customization added by internal IT staff. I checked with IT. They had no record of creating additional database tables. Archive Shadow existed outside the system's official architecture, added by someone somehow, for reasons unknown. On the fifth night, entry number 000000 changed. The description field, previously blank, now contained text, file attached, terminalview.mp4. I stared at the screen, my hands hovering over the keyboard. Fault log entries don't support file attachments. The system was designed to record text data only. Fault codes, location strings, timestamps. Video files couldn't be attached. There was no mechanism for it. But the link was there, a clickable hyperlink labeled terminalview.mp4. I moved my mouse cursor over it, hesitating. Opening unknown files from unexplained sources violated every security protocol I'd been trained to follow. But I needed to understand what was happening to my system. I clicked the link. The video player launched full screen, filling all three of my monitors with black. Then the image appeared. My workstation, viewed from behind and above, showing the back of my chair, my desk, my monitors, and me sitting there, visible from the shoulders up. The footage was recent. I recognized the shirt I was wearing, the coffee cup on my desk, the particular arrangement of reference manuals stacked to my left. The camera angle was impossible. To capture that view, a camera would need to be mounted in the corner of the room behind me, about 7 feet above the floor. I turned in my chair and looked at that corner. Empty. Just wall, ceiling, and a ventilation grate. No camera, no mounting bracket, no cables. I turned back to the monitors. On screen, my recorded self turned to look at the same corner, then turned back to the desk. The footage continued for 30 seconds. Me typing, me sipping coffee, me leaning back in my chair. Normal work activities. Then the video ended. I checked the file's metadata. No creation date, no camera information, no encoding details. Just a runtime. 00:00:30. 30 seconds of footage from a camera that didn't exist. I closed the video player and returned to entry number 000000. The description field had updated. File attached, terminalview.mp4. Watched one time. The system was tracking my interaction with the file. The next night, a second file appeared, terminalview.mp4 00:01:15. A longer video. I opened it. The same camera angle, the same view of my workstation. But this footage was different. It showed me working, yes, but it also showed something else. At the 40-second mark, a shadow moved across the back wall of my workstation area. A human-shaped shadow cast by something outside the camera's field of view. But I was alone in the room. I'd been alone all night. I watched myself on screen, oblivious to the shadow. On screen, me continued typing, unaware. The shadow moved closer, sliding along the wall, approaching my chair. The video ended. I spun around. Nothing behind me, no one in the room. I checked the security access logs. Only one entry. My badge scan at midnight when I'd entered. No one else had accessed the data management center, but the shadow was real. I'd seen it on video, moving with purpose, closing distance to my chair. Something had been in this room. Something the security system hadn't detected. Something that existed only in the footage captured by a camera that shouldn't exist. Over the following 2 weeks, new videos appeared nightly in entry number 00:00:00, each one longer than the last. The footage showed me working across different nights, different shifts, different activities, but in every video the shadow appeared. It grew more defined as the days passed. By the 10th video, I could distinguish features. A human figure, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a maintenance worker's coverall. It stood behind my chair, motionless, watching me work. In the 15th video, it moved into the frame completely. I could see its face, or where a face should have been. The image was blurred, pixelated, as though the camera couldn't properly focus on it. It stood directly behind my chair for 3 full minutes, close enough to touch me, while on screen me remained unaware, typing reports and reviewing logs. I stopped watching the videos after that. I stopped opening entry number 000000 altogether. But the entry continued to update. The description field changed daily. File attached, terminal view.mp4, 00:03:42, unwatched. Then file attached, terminal view.mp4, 00:05:18, unwatched. The videos were getting longer, accumulating like a library of surveillance footage documenting something I couldn't bear to witness. Last night, the description field changed to text only, no video attachment. Live view available, click to watch real-time feed. I did not click. Instead, I stood up, walked to the corner where the impossible camera angle originated, and stared at the ventilation grate. The louvers were dusty, undisturbed for years. I grabbed a maintenance ladder and climbed up to inspect it closely. Behind the grate, the ventilation duct extended back into darkness, and secured to the duct's interior wall about 3 feet back was a small camera, modern, wireless, professionally mounted. Someone had installed a surveillance camera inside the ventilation system, positioned precisely to capture my workstation from the angle shown in the videos. But when? The grate showed no signs of recent removal. The dust was thick, consistent with years of accumulation. The camera itself, when I shone my flashlight on it, looked new, clean, undusty, as though it had been placed there this morning. But the grate's dust indicated it hadn't been opened in years. I reported the camera to facility security. They retrieved it and examined the device. It was a standard commercial security camera transmitting wirelessly to an unknown receiver. But its internal memory contained no footage. It had never recorded anything. According to its activity logs, the camera had been installed yesterday at 3:17 p.m. I checked the security access logs for yesterday. No one had entered the data management center except me. No maintenance crews, no IT staff. The room had been empty all day, yet the camera appeared installed professionally inside a sealed ventilation system placed there by someone who left no trace of entry. Tonight I logged into the system as usual. Entry number 000000 was at the top of my queue. The description field read, "Thank you for finding the camera. Now check your home security footage. Same timestamp, same corner. I've been practicing." I haven't gone home yet. I've been sitting here staring at this message, understanding with growing horror that entry number 000000 isn't logging a fault. It's logging me. It's tracking my movements, learning my patterns, documenting my existence across every location I inhabit. The fault log isn't recording system malfunctions, it's recording where the system can see me, and the status field still reads, "Open." Some databases don't store information, they hunt for it. Story 7, The Phantom Track Map. The new track appeared on my screen at 4:23 a.m. A thin red line branching off the express route and curving east into an area my elevation data showed as solid bedrock. No tunnels, no excavations, just granite extending unbroken for 800 feet. I triple-checked the data sources. The line appeared in every set of historical records. 1920s construction documents, 1950s renovation blueprints, 1980s digital conversions, even current asset management databases. It had always been there and never been there simultaneously, A ghost route existing in all documentation but in no physical reality. I overlaid property maps to see where the phantom terminus would emerge. The coordinates resolved to a single address. My apartment building. Track level, negative 847 feet, directly beneath my bedroom. I am an infrastructure mapping surveyor for the Metropolitan Underground Transit Authority. My specialty is converting historical track diagrams into modern digital schematics, taking century-old paper drawings, CAD files from various eras, and field survey data, then synthesizing them into accurate, comprehensive maps of the entire subway system. This work is critical for maintenance planning, expansion projects, and emergency response coordination. When someone needs to know exactly where a tunnel runs, how deep it goes, what utilities it intersects, they consult my maps. I've been with the Muta Mapping Division for 9 years. The work requires obsessive attention to detail and a deep understanding of surveying principles, coordinate systems, and historical engineering practices. I work primarily from the office, though I occasionally accompany field survey crews to verify measurements or investigate discrepancies between documentation and physical reality. The subway system's history complicates mapping efforts. Construction occurred in waves spanning 120 years, involving different contractors, different standards, and different documentation practices. Early tunnels were dug with hand tools and mapped using compass bearings and chain measurements. Modern sections were excavated with tunnel boring machines and mapped with GPS and laser scanning. Reconciling these data sources into a coherent, accurate representation is challenging. The Phantom Track Map project began 6 months ago. The Muta Planning Department requested I create a comprehensive master map integrating all available data from 1903 to present. Every line, every station, every service tunnel, every abandoned section. They wanted one authoritative reference showing the complete underground infrastructure. I estimated the project would take 18 months. I began by digitizing the oldest records. Hand-drawn plans from the original subway construction stored in the city archives as oversized blueprints on linen paper. I photographed each sheet, imported the images into CAD software, and traced the track alignments onto digital layers. Tedious work, but necessary. These documents contained information that had never been digitized. The first anomaly appeared in a 1907 construction drawing for the express line beneath the financial district. The drawing showed a standard 2-track tunnel with stations at Park Place, Fulton Street, and Wall Street. But a faint pencil line, barely visible on the aged linen, showed a third branch diverging from the main tunnel between Fulton and Wall Street. The branch curved east and terminated with a notation. Alt route, see Survey 47B. I searched the archives for Survey 47B. It wasn't in the index. I spent 3 days reviewing every document from 1907, looking for any reference to an alternate route. Nothing. Survey 47B had never existed, or it had been lost. I dismissed the pencil line as a planning sketch, an idea considered but never built. Early construction documents contained many such annotations. I continued digitizing other documents. The branch appeared again in a 1923 renovation plan. This time it was clearly drawn in ink, labeled Service Access Tunnel, East Spur, with detailed elevation profiles showing it descending 850 feet below sea level, far deeper than the main tunnels, which typically run 60 to 100 feet down. The document showed the spur passing beneath the East River, far below the riverbed, through solid bedrock. That didn't make sense. Subway tunnels avoid deep excavation due to cost and engineering challenges. An 850-foot deep tunnel would be extraordinarily expensive and serve no obvious purpose. I checked modern survey data to see if any structure existed at that depth. Nothing. No tunnels, no utilities, no excavations of any kind. But the 1923 document insisted the East Spur existed. It even included construction costs and completion dates. $2.3 million, completed August 1921. I consulted historical project budgets from 1921. No expenditures matched. The construction supposedly cost $2.3 million, a significant sum, yet no corresponding financial records existed. The tunnel had been documented but never funded, built but never paid for. Over the next 3 months, I found the East Spur in 17 different historical documents spanning 1907 to 1998. Each document showed the same alignment, branching from the main tunnel curving east, descending to 850 feet, terminating approximately 3,400 feet from the divergence point. The drawings were consistent, precise, and detailed. Yet the tunnel didn't exist. I decided to physically verify the area where the East Spur supposedly diverged from the main tunnel. I joined a track inspection crew accessing that section, bringing survey equipment to measure the actual tunnel dimensions and compare them to my historical documents. We entered the tunnel at Fulton Street Station at 2:00 a.m. The inspection crew went ahead to check rail conditions while I remained near the alleged divergence point, approximately 800 feet east of the station platform. I examined the tunnel walls with a flashlight. Solid concrete and tile, unbroken, showing no evidence of any branch or sealed opening. The wall appeared original, 1900s construction, never modified. I set up a ground-penetrating radar unit borrowed from the engineering department. GPR can detect voids and structures hidden behind walls. I scanned the area where the East Spur should diverge. The radar showed solid concrete and bedrock. No voids, no hidden passages, nothing. Yet when I photographed the wall and reviewed the images later, I noticed something strange. In one photo, taken at a specific angle, the wall's texture appeared different. A subtle rectangular outline, approximately 8 feet high by 6 feet wide, visible only in that particular lighting. I returned the next night and examined the area more closely. The rectangle was there, barely perceptible, as though someone had carefully patched a doorway using slightly different concrete that had aged to match the surrounding wall. I pressed my hand against the rectangle. The concrete felt cooler than the surrounding wall, as though air circulated behind it. I knocked on it. The sound was slightly hollow, not solid like the rest of the wall. Something was behind this section of concrete. I reported my findings to the engineering department and requested they investigate further. They sent a crew to core drill a small inspection hole through the wall. The drill penetrated 3 inches of concrete, then broke through into empty space. They inserted a camera probe. The probe revealed a small chamber behind the wall, roughly 6 feet square, with a second wall visible beyond it. The chamber appeared to be a sealed anteroom, possibly originally used as construction access, then bricked up when the work was completed. Nothing unusual. Old subway construction was full of such spaces. But the second wall was different. It was steel, not concrete. A heavy steel door, rusted but intact, with a wheel lock mechanism. The camera couldn't see beyond it. The engineering department decided to leave it sealed. Opening unknown chambers posed safety risks, and the space wasn't relevant to current operations. They patched the inspection hole and filed the report. I couldn't let it go. I knew the East Spur was behind that door. I knew it with certainty that defied rational explanation. The historical documents weren't wrong. The tunnel existed, had always existed, hidden behind that steel door. 3 weeks ago, I returned to the site alone, during a weekend maintenance window when the tunnels were closed to traffic. I brought concrete cutting tools and worked for 4 hours, carefully removing the patch that sealed the anteroom. I crawled through into the chamber. It smelled of rust and stale air. The steel door stood before me, locked, its wheel lock mechanism seized by decades of corrosion. I applied penetrating oil and worked the wheel with a pipe wrench. It moved reluctantly, screeching with rust, but it moved. After 30 minutes, I felt the lock disengage. I pulled the door open. Beyond was darkness. My flashlight beam revealed a tunnel, narrow, roughly excavated, descending steeply. Not modern construction. This looked older, more primitive, as though carved by hand. The walls were bare rock, the floor uneven, no track, no rail. Just a passage leading down into the earth. I followed it. The tunnel descended at approximately 15 degrees, curving gently eastward, exactly matching the alignment shown in my historical documents. I walked for what felt like 20 minutes, my flashlight casting long shadows, the air growing colder and damper as I descended. The tunnel ended at a second steel door identical to the first. This door was newer, less corroded. A modern padlock secured it, installed recently within the last few years. Someone else had been here. Someone was maintaining this tunnel, keeping it sealed but accessible. I couldn't open the padlock. I photographed the door, noted its exact location on my survey GPS unit, and returned to the surface. My GPS data placed the door 850 feet below sea level, 3,400 feet from the divergence point, exactly where the historical documents said the east spur terminated. When I calculated the geographic coordinates of that termination point and overlaid them on a city street map, I found the location. 447 Bennett Street, apartment 6C. My address. My apartment. The tunnel ended directly beneath my home. I've lived at 447 Bennett Street for 4 years. It's an old building constructed in 1926, 5 years after the East Spur was supposedly completed. I never questioned why the rent was unusually low for the neighborhood, or why the building management discouraged basement access, or why I sometimes heard sounds at night, distant mechanical humming, rhythmic vibrations that I attributed to subway trains passing far below. Last night I accessed my building's basement using a master key borrowed from a maintenance worker. I found the boiler room, the storage cages, the electrical panels. And in the farthest corner, behind a rack of forgotten furniture, I found a steel hatch set flush with the floor. It was locked, but the lock was new, modern, identical to the one I'd found on the second steel door in the tunnel. I haven't opened the hatch. I'm sitting in my apartment now, staring at my completed master map on my computer screen. The east spur is displayed in red, branching from the main tunnel, descending through bedrock, terminating precisely beneath this building. And in the map's properties panel, hidden in the metadata that users never see, there's a notation I didn't write. Surveyor residence flagged for integration. Mapping complete. Access granted. I don't know who wrote that. I don't know what integration means, but I understand now that I wasn't discovering the East Spur. I was being mapped into it. Some tunnels don't lead anywhere. They lead to you. Story 8. The technician who signed tomorrow's report. The printer came to life at 4:47 a.m., whirring and clicking, ejecting 3 pages into the output tray. I hadn't sent anything to print. I walked to the printer and picked up the pages. A completed fault response report, formatted correctly, detailed thoroughly, bearing my handwritten signature at the bottom. The report was dated November 21st, tomorrow. It described faults I hadn't yet encountered, conversations I hadn't yet had, repairs I hadn't yet performed. I read through the entries. Signal failure at 1:23 a.m. Switch malfunction at 2:45 a.m. Radio interference at 3:17 a.m. Below that, a final entry added in shaky handwriting that didn't quite match my signature. 4:47 a.m. Printer fault. Do not investigate basement junction box 7 alpha. Report ends here. I looked at my watch. 4:47 a.m. and I was already walking toward the basement stairs. I am an overnight fault response specialist for the Metropolitan Underground Transit Authority. My position exists in the gap between automated monitoring and scheduled maintenance. When something breaks at 3 a.m., I'm the one who responds. I work alone, covering the entire Central District, driving a service truck loaded with tools and spare parts. My radio and pager connect me to Central Dispatch, which feeds me a continuous stream of problems. Signal malfunctions, switch failures, communication dropouts, power anomalies. I diagnose, repair, and document everything, producing detailed reports that maintenance crews use to plan permanent fixes during regular working hours. I've held this position for 11 years. The work suits my temperament. I prefer solitary assignments, technical problems with clear solutions, and the empty tunnels where I can work without interruption. Each night follows a predictable rhythm. Receive alert, respond to location, identify fault, implement temporary repair, document everything in my field report book, move to the next problem. By the end of my shift, I typically handle between 8 and 15 faults, each one logged and signed off. My signature is important. Every repair I complete requires my handwritten signature on the official report form, confirming I personally performed the work and verified its success. It's a liability issue. If a repair fails and causes an accident, the signed report establishes who performed the work and when. I take this seriously. I never sign a report until the work is absolutely complete and tested. 4 weeks ago, my routine broke. I arrived at the Franklin Street Maintenance Depot at 11:00 p.m. to begin my shift. I parked my truck, entered the depot office to collect my radio and pager, and found 3 pages sitting in the printer's output tray. This wasn't unusual. The printer was shared by several departments and people often left documents behind. But when I glanced at the pages, I saw my name at the top, Overnight Fault Response Report, submitted by Thomas Brennan. That was my name. But I hadn't submitted any reports yet. My shift was just starting. I picked up the pages and read them. The report documented 5 faults from October 23rd, tonight's date, with detailed descriptions of each problem and the repairs I'd performed. Signal failure at Franklin Street Station, 12:47 a.m. Found loose relay contact in signal bungalow, cleaned and tightened, tested successful. Switch malfunction at Chambers Street, 2:15 a.m. Replaced broken detection sensor, calibrated per specification. Radio interference on channel B, 3:40 a.m. Traced to faulty repeater at Commerce Street, bypassed via alternate routing. The entries were specific, technical, and accurate to how I typically documented my work. But they described events that hadn't happened yet. I checked the timestamp at the bottom of the report. Submitted October 24, 2024, 7:45 a.m. That was 9 hours in the future, the time I normally submitted my shift reports. I examined the signature line. My signature was there, not a photocopy or a scan, but actual ink on paper, slightly smudged as though I'd signed the page moments ago. I compared it to my driver's license. Identical. The loops, the pressure points, the way the B in Brennan connected to the R, all matched my handwriting exactly. I considered explanations, someone playing a prank perhaps, but that would require forging my signature nearly perfectly and predicting specific faults that would occur during my shift. Or I'd written the report myself and forgotten. But I'd just arrived at the depot and hadn't touched the printer. I folded the pages and put them in my pocket. My pager beeped. First call of the night. Signal failure at Franklin Street Station. I checked the time. 12:47 a.m. Exactly as the pre-written report predicted. I drove to Franklin Street Station and accessed the signal bungalow. Found the relay with the loose contact, exactly as described in the report. I cleaned and tightened it, tested the signal, confirmed proper operation. The repair took 18 minutes. I returned to my truck and documented the work in my report book, writing essentially the same description that had appeared in the pre-printed report. My pager beeped again at 2:10 a.m., switch malfunction at Chambers Street. 5 minutes earlier than the pre-written report predicted, but close. I responded and found the broken detection sensor, replaced it, calibrated it, tested successful. Same repair described in tomorrow's report. By 4:00 a.m., I'd completed 4 of the 5 faults documented in the pre-written report, each one matching the predictions with minor time variations. The final predicted fault, radio interference on Channel B at 3:40 a.m., hadn't occurred yet. I waited. My radio remained silent. 4:15 a.m., 4:30 a.m. Nothing. Maybe the pre-written report was wrong. Maybe I'd broken whatever pattern had allowed it to predict my night. I drove back to the Franklin Street depot to refuel my truck. The printer was running when I entered the office. It ejected 3 pages. I walked over and picked them up. Another fault response report dated October 24 today, but dated for 7:45 a.m., 3 hours in the future. This report documented 6 faults, including the 4 I'd already completed and 2 I hadn't encountered yet. 4:47 a.m. Printer malfunction at Franklin Street Depot, paper jam cleared. And below that, 5:15 a.m. Power surge at Wall Street Station, circuit breaker reset. I looked at the printer. It was functioning normally, no paper jam. I checked my watch. 4:46 a.m. If the report was accurate, the printer would jam in 1 minute. I stood there, staring at the machine. At 4:47 a.m. exactly, the printer made a grinding noise and stopped mid-page, its error light blinking. Paper jam. I opened the access panel, cleared the jammed sheet, closed the panel. The printer resumed normal operation. I had just performed a repair that a report from the future had documented before it happened. I was caught in a causal loop. The report predicted the fault. I responded to the report. My response created the conditions the report described. I sat down at the office desk, my hands shaking, trying to understand what was happening. The pre-written reports weren't predictions. They were instructions. Something or someone was generating my work orders in advance, documenting repairs before I performed them, signing my name to reports I hadn't yet written. And I was following the script exactly, validating the reports by completing the work they described. I decided to break the pattern. The next predicted fault, power surge at Wall Street Station, 5:15 a.m. I would ignore it. I wouldn't respond. I would sit here in the depot and wait, forcing the pre-written report to be wrong. At 5:14 a.m., my pager beeped. Power surge at Wall Street Station. I didn't move. The pager beeped again. I ignored it. Central Dispatch called my radio. Unit 7, respond to Wall Street Station, power anomaly, priority 1. I keyed my radio. Unit 7, I'm not responding. Assigned to day shift. Silence on the radio. Then, Unit 7, you are the only responder available. This is a safety-critical fault. You are required to respond. I didn't respond. I sat at the desk watching the clock. 5:20 a.m. 5:25 a.m. My radio and pager remained silent. I'd successfully refused the assignment. The pre-written report would be wrong. At 5:30 a.m., my radio crackled. Unit 7, power surge at Wall Street has self-resolved. Cancel response. I drove to Wall Street Station anyway. I needed to know if the fault had actually occurred or if dispatch was lying to protect their scheduling. I accessed the station's electrical room and checked the circuit breaker panel. The main breaker had tripped and been reset, recently within the last 15 minutes. Scuff marks on the floor indicated someone had been here. I checked the access log. One entry, my badge, time-stamped 5:23 a.m. But I hadn't been here at 5:23. I'd been at the Franklin Street Depot refusing the assignment. Yet the access log insisted I'd entered this room, reset the breaker, and left. My badge had been used without me being present. I returned to the depot. Another report was waiting in the printer tray. This one was different. Instead of my neat, printed documentation, it was handwritten. Shaky letters written by someone with poor motor control, as though injured or exhausted. My name was still at the top, but the handwriting wasn't quite mine. The entries described faults I hadn't completed yet, faults scheduled for the coming night. November 21st, one day in the future. At the bottom of the page was a note in the same shaky handwriting. This is not a loop, this is a collapse. Each night, the gap between report and response shrinks. Soon, the reports will arrive after the work is complete. Then the reports will arrive before you enter service. Then the reports will arrive before you exist. Do not investigate basement junction box 7 Alpha. The signature machine is there. It has been signing your reports for 3 years. I stared at those words. Signature machine. Something that could replicate my handwriting, generating reports in my name, documenting work that hadn't occurred, but why? And how had it been signing reports for 3 years when I'd only noticed the pre-written reports for a few weeks? I pulled my archived reports from the filing cabinet. 3 years of nightly documentation, hundreds of signed forms. I examined the signatures closely, comparing them to each other and to my current handwriting. They were consistent, perfectly matching my style. But when I looked very closely, I noticed something. The signatures from the past 6 months showed a slight tremor, a barely perceptible shake in the lines that my hand had never produced. The tremor worsened gradually over time, becoming more pronounced in recent reports, as though the machine producing the signatures was degrading, losing precision. The reports I'd been finding in the printer weren't predictions of the future. They were outputs from a failing system that had been generating my documentation for months or years. A system that was beginning to produce its reports earlier and earlier, breaking through the temporal boundary between event and documentation until past and future tangled together. I went to the basement. Junction Box 7 Alpha was located in the oldest section of the depot's foundation, a utility room that hadn't been renovated since the 1930s. The door was marked Authorized Access Only. I opened it. The room was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, lined with ancient electrical panels and cable runs. In the center sat a metal desk, and on that desk sat a device I couldn't immediately identify. A mechanical arm mounted to a base holding a pen positioned above a stack of blank fault report forms. Wires ran from the device to a small computer, modern, recent, completely out of place in this ancient room. I approached the device. The pen arm moved, activated by my presence. It lowered to the topmost report form and began writing. I watched as it produced a perfect copy of my handwriting, filling out a fault response report dated November 22. 2 days in the future. The pen moved smoothly, confidently, producing loops and curves identical to my own. When it reached the signature line, it signed my name. The form ejected from the stack. The arm repositioned and began writing a second report, then a third. The machine was generating reports continuously, documenting faults that hadn't occurred, repairs I hadn't performed, shifts I hadn't worked. It had been doing this for years. I checked the computer. Its display showed a simple interface, a log of every fault in the subway system, updated in real time from central dispatch. An algorithm analyzed each fault, cross-referenced my historical response patterns, and generated predicted repair documentation. The mechanical arm transcribed those predictions onto paper forms using my handwriting, creating physical reports that the system then filed as official records. And the reports were accurate. The algorithm knew me better than I knew myself. It predicted my responses with 97% accuracy according to the statistics displayed on screen. For 3 years it had been ghostwriting my professional existence, and no one had noticed because the reports were correct. But the algorithm was failing now. The computer's error log showed increasing instability. Reports generated too early, timestamps drifting into the future, causality violations accumulating. The system was producing reports before the faults occurred, sometimes days in advance, trying to document a future it couldn't fully predict. I reached for the power switch to shut down the machine. My hand stopped mid-motion. I didn't control it. My arm moved on its own, pulling back, returning to my side. I tried again. Same result. I couldn't shut down the machine. Something wouldn't let me. Then I understood. The algorithm didn't just predict my responses, it controlled them. For 3 years, I'd been following scripts generated by this system, responding to faults in predictable patterns, performing repairs exactly as the algorithm expected. I'd thought I was making decisions, but I was executing code. The reports weren't documentation of my work, they were programs that ran on me. I'm writing this in the basement, sitting at the desk, watching the mechanical arm produce tomorrow's reports. I can't leave. My body won't respond to my commands. The algorithm has detected my attempt to shut it down and has taken direct control, overriding my voluntary motor functions, keeping me here at the desk where I belong. The arm just finished writing tomorrow's reports. Now it's starting on next week and next month. It's accelerating, producing years of documentation in minutes, filling out my entire future in advance. I can see my signature repeated hundreds of times, each one perfect, each one mine, each one written by the machine that knows me better than I know myself. The final report is dated March 15, 2031, 6 years from now. The last entry reads, 11:47 p.m. Basement junction box 7 alpha maintenance complete. System shutdown authorized. Technician retirement processed. Below that, my signature. And below that, in the same shaky handwriting from the warning note, some signatures don't document the past. They authorize the future. The arm has stopped moving. The reports are complete. I can feel control returning to my limbs, but I don't want to move, because I understand now that everything I do from this moment forward has already been signed off on, documented, approved. I am living through reports that already exist, walking a path that was written before I arrived. The mechanical arm just moved again, writing on a fresh form. This one is different. It's a personnel action form. Employee termination, Thomas Brennan, effective date, November 22, 2024, 6:00 a.m. That's in 10 minutes. At the bottom, my signature, and below that, a single word in my handwriting. Accepted. Some technicians don't sign their own reports. Their reports sign them.